Good afternoon, everybody. If we could make a start, please. Sorry for the delayed start of this session because the previous session overran a little. My name is Tim Pryce, and I head up the UK Carbon Trust's work with public sector organisations. So I head up the work that the Carbon Trust does with local authorities, municipalities, city governments, healthcare organisations and universities. And I'm here to chair this session on reducing the energy needs of urban areas and the environmental impacts of energy use in urban areas as well. So we're very much looking at things like how can cities reduce energy demand, how can cities become more efficient and reduce demand, but also how can cities be a source of supply of greener energy as well, and how can cities reduce the negative environmental impacts of energy use, be those impacts from particulates and air pollution, or be those very grave risks that we face and risks that were highlighted by the recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report from things like heat waves and flooding and the vulnerability that urban environments have to those kinds of things. So that's the topic of today's session. It's very much around best practice. We've got people from cities around the world to talk about some of the best practice in cities around the world, and I very much look forward to hearing to what they've got to say. So as we're late, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first speaker, who is, I hope I've pronounced his name correctly, Jørgen Abildgaard from the city of Copenhagen. He's the Executive Climate Project Director for the city of Copenhagen. He's going to talk a bit about what is going on in Copenhagen. Thank you.
Okay, ready.
Okay. Okay. This way. Thank you for this possibility to talk about what we are doing in Copenhagen and the experience we have had. As you maybe know, we have a really ambitious target to be carbon neutral already in 2025, and we have had a process. It was decided already in 2009, but we made the more precise plan over the last 2-3 years. And I will go a little bit more in details about the background and how we make the political case on this. What is important in Copenhagen is that we have the rule, or the way we make the plan is that we have 3 pillars that all plans have to relate to. We have to focus both on quality of life and what the plans can contribute to that, also growth, and not least sustainability. And we make a climate plan, of course, sustainability is the main pillar. But the council also wanted us to look at how can the climate plan support quality of life and not least growth. And in fact, we also were asked how we can involve stakeholders much more in the process and in implementation. And for that, we also set up a lot of criteria for how we want to implement the plan, and also have focus on sustainability, innovation, data, use data, and test facilities in the city as such. So what we see in Copenhagen is that we really want to look into possibilities. The harbor bath is a great example of that. We cleaned up the water 10 years ago, and now we have a lot of harbor bath in the harbor. And as you can see, people are also using it as a new possibility. So that is a really good picture on how we see and how we want to develop solutions in Copenhagen. We expect a 20% increase in population in the next 12 years, around 100,000 new inhabitants. We are surrounded by the sea or other municipalities, so the only way we can develop Copenhagen is to some extent to use the harbor areas where it was formerly brown factories and so on, industry and brown areas for some years. But we also have to make new land in the sea. And we have some development projects, and they are of course important in that part because we can show what is possible with new buildings. On the other hand, we have also a lot of existing buildings where we have focus on how we can retrofit that. The model for stakeholder involvement is that we really have to have business, universities, Copenhageners, and of course also relate to the national regulation and that, and see how we can use that in our 4 pillars in the climate plan with energy consumption, energy production and mobility, and then our own activities in our own buildings and our own fleet of cars in implementing the strategy. The way we made the strategy was also with involvement of stakeholders already from the beginning. We started out with 22 business plans developed by project leaders in the city administration, and over the autumn 2011, we invited around 200 stakeholders from companies, from universities, from organizations, and also from the national agencies to help us qualify and verify the possibilities in 2025 and also beyond 2025 on market development, technology development, risk, and so on. And we had a process on that on the basis of the input from the stakeholders. We made the first draft of the plan and put that forward to the stakeholders again, and also involving citizens in that process. And on the basis of that, we made the plan and will reduce the number of business areas to 14. So that is the basis for what we're doing now in Copenhagen. In making that, it was really difficult for us to make the political case show that it was possible to reduce CO2 emissions with more precise on all initiatives. What could they contribute on CO2? And we found out that it was possible. It's ambitious, but it's possible. We also focused on the investments, and that is an important part of the plan. Because what we are going to invest in Copenhagen as a city budget is only a little bit of the total investments in Copenhagen. And therefore we need to have a dialogue with all the investors, otherwise it will not be possible to reach the target in 2025. We have to have contact with investors in buildings, the one that own the buildings, the one that are investing in power plants and so on. Otherwise we have to have them to focus more on energy, climate, and environment, and we have to learn that also in the city administration, how to do that. It's much easier when it comes to the direct investments in energy, because we own the energy, one of the energy companies in Copenhagen, and we have the possibilities to use that and enforce what we want to and negotiate together with them. They are also responsible for district heating in Copenhagen, and that is one of the pillars, because 98% of all buildings in Copenhagen is covered by district heating from our power plants. In making the political case, we also focus on economics. This is the example of the socioeconomic part, that we could show that it is a positive socioeconomic investments for Copenhagen. We also made the example for citizens. It was important to show that it will be cheaper for Copenhagen, at least not more expensive for Copenhageners in the future. And that was a guarantee for the city council that they really want to go ahead with this, and that they could see that it was also a good political case for them. One of the other things was what could be the employment impact of this. It's difficult to say if it will create new jobs, but we could see that there was at least jobs in this, and it was also an amount that was quite important for the city council to see. And we also tried to break it down to more precise initiatives on the way. And we also do that in the implementation. Where are we now? It was approved last year, the climate plan, and we got the first budget last year, and we have around 50 projects under implementation. We have a project leader in the city administration on all projects, and we are increasing that number in the coming years when we get more budget and also have new projects with stakeholders outside the city administration. We have focused on energy consumption. We are now mapping all the buildings in Copenhagen to set up pilot projects together with building owners to scale up the possibilities for implementation. At the same time, we also have focused on lighthouse projects, show what is possible, both in new buildings and existing buildings. We are well on the way with initiatives in energy production. We are going from coal to biomass. We are building wind turbines. We are increasing the quality of our district heating system, building up with district cooling, focusing on using the waste much more intelligent in waste handling, taking out plastic, focusing on taking out organic waste and use that in an intelligent way. And on mobility, we want to support the market and make the infrastructure that it makes possible for new fuels to come into the market, based on that we have bikes in the basic in our mobility. 1/3 of all Copenhageners use their bike every day for work or study, and we have a quite good public transport system. So 2/3 of all Copenhageners are using either their feet or their bike or the public transport for transport in the city. So all in all, I'd say the basic for what we're doing in Copenhagen is based on a long tradition with focus on environment issues and hard work for many decades, for example, on bikes and bike lanes. But it's also important that we have a strong political commitment from the City Council and understanding that it is important to have a long-term vision, but also to ask for short-term implementations plan that correspond to the budget. So that makes it possible to get the financial support for new initiatives that we can start from the City Council and then work together with stakeholders. So the broad stakeholder involvement is really key in our implementation in Copenhagen. And I think that will be all over the world. Without that, you will never get to the target. We also have to look into new partnership model, public-private innovation projects, public-private partnerships and so on. And then, not least, also internally to learn our own project leaders how to work together with business, learn them what is the business plan, what is the thinking of business, and have common understanding on how we can develop that together. Finally, and not least, communication, both internally, national basis, but also international, national cooperation. We are a member of C40. We use that network quite a lot. So knowledge sharing and learn from other cities. We have a really good basis in Copenhagen, but we also have the general understanding that it's important for us to learn from other cities, steal good ideas, transform them to the Danish context, and implement them in Denmark. So that is a basic condition for what we're doing in Copenhagen. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jørgen. That's certainly, in our experience at the Carbon Trust, helping cities in the UK to develop low carbon and plans to adapt to and deal with climate change. We know the importance a good strategic plan and a good target has to achieving results. So I think that's a very good example of the importance of strategic planning for climate adaptation and mitigation at the city scale. I'd now like to introduce the next speaker, who is Kristin Barbey from the University of Karlsruhe in Germany. And she's going to talk a bit about her thesis on spatial planning for climate change adaptation and mitigation in Germany. Thank you.
Hello, nice to see you. I would like to speak today about the integrated spatial concept, climate protection and climate adaptation, which I developed looking forward a nature-orientated, climate-friendly metropolitan region, 2050. Reducing the energy needs and its environmental impacts, it's absolutely a question of space and spatial action. For me, I'm an architect and an urban planner, so the focus is on the space. The integrated spatial concept of interacting strategies, climate protection and climate adaptation, has the focus on three essential strategies for me. It is first of all the nature development. If you're talking about strategies to adapt, we have to qualify our ecological potentials and to develop the green spaces in the region and in the city. And of course, we have to restructure our urban space, our cities towards climate-friendly and water-sensitive inner city development. And of course, we have to do this energy transformation to a regenerative energy supply. These strategies have to be planned and implemented on every spatial level, on the regional level, city level, on the level of the quarter and the house. And so I hope that you can see it better as me here. I did this concept, a sort of a roadmap 2050 for the metropolitan region of Rhine-Neckar. It's in the south of Germany, and the main cities are Mannheim and Heidelberg. And so we have, on the one hand side, we have some quite dense cities, but we have also very, very beautiful landscape. And we have to see in this conception process where to put, or where is it possible to implement, for example, the energy transformation strategies like some wind parks and solar power plants. Looking forward to have a supply, a self-sufficient supply of this region. And so I will tell you about something about the content basis of this conception. For me, it's a project of nature. Knowing the anthropogenic impact to climate change, we have to change our action. And that's the point. We have to look to orientate all our spatial action to these natural conditions. And the project of nature means to me the qualification of the ecological potentials. And it means, in a spatial sense, the concentration of our spatial actions and the protections of our precious landscapes. It has a significance also to the appreciation of nature in a cultural, aesthetical sense. And so I show you some measures, just very quickly now. It's the forest transformation and new forests in the region, the open space protection and open space development of city green spaces, space for the river, new retention areas and forests, groundwater protection, and organic agriculture. And we have some scientific reports who are telling us what is possible to save on energy, and what is possible, how we can reduce with these strategies the CO2 emissions. And concerning the cities, we have to look for inner urban development. We have to develop our existing building stock. We have to look for the energetic urban renewal and for a climate-friendly and water-sensitive urban development. In terms of the energy transformation, we need to concentrate some wind energy plants in the regional space. And we have to think about the urban use of photovoltaic in the commercial areas, for example, or industrial areas with a great potential of rooftops. We have to think about to use our potentials of geothermal energy, of hydropower, and of bioenergy. And of course, we have to expand our public transport system and the climate neutral mobility. And we have, of course, to expand our infrastructure, our electricity network, and energy storage. And so if you see the total of this implementation of these strategies, we see that by this developing, we can reach the emphasizing of the natural landscapes like the Rhine Valley with new retention areas and new forests, and we can protect our large forests, which are here in blue, by technical implementation, because we have the spatial possibilities to concentrate, for example, wind energy farms, which are here in orange, and we can concentrate our solar plants in the urban context. And so this is, for me, it's important to show the impact, the spatial impacts of these transforming processes, which we have to implement the next years. And it's like an informal planning instrument to make up a basic statement for the public discussion and participation about these things. And the essential is that it is possible to realize a CO2 reduction by 70%, and of course we can lower our energy demand by 50%, and it is possible to make this region energy self-sufficient by 100% by renewable energies on this own territory. So I adapted these strategies to the local area, I made up a concept for the city of Mannheim, and I looked for some strategies for the green metropolis, for the inner city development, and for the energy transformation. And looking to the entire map, you can see that they are all over the city. We have potentials to develop the strategies, climate protection and climate adaptation. And and this is a basis. This is, again, this project of nature. The basis is a natural space, urban space, and here you can see the new green spaces which are connected to this ground of the green space to make the city resilient. And so here you can see again all these potentials of which we have in our cities. For example, in terms of energy transformation, we have all these industrial and commercial areas to establish there some solar plants, and we have these potentials for green space development and of urban renewable, and so it is possible to develop a nature-oriented, climate-friendly metropolis 2050. And here, if we look for the districts, the different quarters, we see that in every quarter there are these possibilities, these potentials to develop the green space, to develop the inner city development and the energy transformation. And so this is, for me, a very good place to work together with all the different actors located in these quarters, with the citizens and with the private companies, but also with the city planners of the administration and the energy suppliers. And so I think this is a very good area to find the right solutions. And if we are able to develop these quarters climate friendly, we are able to develop the city climate friendly and even the metropolitan region. And so here, this is a relation from the city and the metropolitan region both work together. They have this spatial, the energetic and climatic relations, and so if we want to make our city smarter, we have also to look on the hinterland of the region, and we have to start up just in our own area to implement this necessary or this needed transformation processes. And for me, the conditions to realize the nature-orientated, climate-friendly metropolitan region 2050, it is important to develop these integrated spatial concepts of interacting strategies, climate protection and climate adaptation, and the principles of connecting, cooperating, and interacting are essential on different levels, on the level of preparation, of the conceptual level, on the level of planning and realization, and on the spatial level, of course. And so, so what is very important is for me that the political commitment is represented in the spatial concept. And there are some examples showing us if this happens, or if there is if the political decision is connected with the spatial decision, the realization is very, could happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Kristin. As someone that studied geography at university, I certainly agree that spatial planning and spatial concepts are very important at the city scale, so it's very interesting to hear what you had to say there. Thank you. I'd now like to introduce the next speaker. He is Jayesh Ranjan, and he is from the Andhra Pradesh Industrial Infrastructure Corporation in India. And he's going to talk a little bit about exemplar climate policy and action in Singapore, and contrast that a little bit with what's going on in India as well. Thank you, Jayesh.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I bring an Asian perspective to this topic. Most of you will be aware that amongst all the regions in the world, the rate and pace of urbanization is highest in Asia. In fact, there are many cities in Asia where the population has more than doubled in a matter of a decade. And obviously, all this has consequences for energy consumption also. Now, the main argument which I am trying to make is that consciousness and sensitivity to minimizing or reducing energy consumption, consuming energy efficiently, can only happen if it is a part of a larger policy on climate change and global warming. And therefore, I studied the policy as it exists in various Asian cities. I studied more than 20 cities, including ones in India, China, and so on. And I found that there are extreme cases. There are certain cities which have no policy at all. They are just kind of muddling through. But at the same time, there are certain cities which have very, very comprehensive, very detailed, very balanced kind of a policy. And more importantly, the policy has also been put into practice. There are also cases where there are policies, however, they only exist on paper. And what happens in practice is very different from what has been mentioned on paper. So during my research, I found that Singapore, which is of course not only a city, it is a city-state, but to use it, to see it as a city, Singapore can be a very good exemplar on how energy conservation, energy efficiency can be seen in the context of a climate change policy. And therefore, I have tried to present here what are the highlights, what are the salient features of the climate change policy of Singapore. And very briefly, I contrast that with the climate change policies of some of the Indian cities, and we will appreciate how wide the difference is. Now, the policy on climate change in Singapore has two components. There are very well laid out adaptation responses, and also there are very clear mitigation responses. The adaptation responses basically focus on improving the resilience to climate change and formulating appropriate strategies. For instance, there is a concept of green buildings. Because it is an island state, so there is a concern about coastal protection, biodiversity, how to optimize water resources, urban flooding. Climate change also has a component of introducing new forms of disease and how that disease can be controlled. So there are a host of adaptation responses. And then there is a mitigation strategy also on how carbon emission can be reduced in different sectors. And one very good example is how they manage the emissions of vehicles in the transport sector through fuel taxes, by controlling vehicle ownership. And of course, there are lots of incentives for energy efficiency. And Singapore has a commitment of reducing emissions by 16% business as usual scenario by 2020 if there is a global commitment to that extent. And otherwise also, even if there is no global commitment, the country is committed to reduce the emissions by 7 to 11%. Like many other spheres of governance in Singapore, the policy is also based on certain core philosophy. And it is based on certain guiding principles. And there are 3 non-negotiable core principles. There is a long-term vision. So for instance, there is a planning horizon of almost 20 years. And then there is a pragmatic and cost-effective approach. For example, when we look at how they price energy, there is a market mechanism which balances supply and demand. And then they are also flexible. Whatever is the fuel mix which is best suited to the requirements of the country, they have adopted that. The policy is very comprehensive. They have tried to identify different sources of emission, carbon emissions. For instance, they have found that industry is the biggest source, emitting roughly 60%. Followed by buildings, transport, households, etc. And therefore, there is a solution for all these sectors. For example, transport, they find that most of the emissions are happening due to more trips, because of their port activities, because it is a port hub, it is an aviation hub. Households utilize more and more appliances, and therefore they consume more energy, and so on. So they have studied in detail what are the contributing factors of this emissions. And this is the way in which they have tried to work out mitigation measures. So for example, they want to switch fuel mix from fuel oil to natural gas. They are testing lots of solar technologies. They want to incinerate sludge rather than dispose it into landfills. For domestic appliances, the standards have been tightened. Buildings must comply with green standards, green mark certification. Then they are encouraging the usage of more of public transport. And similarly for industries also, there are a number of incentive schemes if they take up energy efficient manufacturing processes. And similarly for adaptation also, they have a very, very comprehensive measure. They have tried to study in detail how climate change is impacting the local life, what are the vulnerabilities, and based on that, they have taken up actions. They are also very multidisciplinary in the approach. I found that in many cities, the Ministry of Environment alone is responsible for the city's response to global warming. But in Singapore, we found that various agencies, so for instance, coastal protection is the domain of one agency, water resources is a domain of another one, but they follow what is called a whole of government approach. All agencies work together in drafting this climate change policy. And they have done very detailed study. It is not an ad hoc assumptions based on some kind of global literature, but they have done country-specific study. And as I explained, it is very far-sighted. It covers an horizon of more than 25 years. And they have created institutions which have the mandate of implementing this policy. There are working groups. There are specific instruments of the government which are going to work on specific tasks and assignments. and every element of the policy has a corresponding action component. If the policy suggests that you have to do, let us say, reduce energy usage in a building, then there are certain components of incentives, of monitoring, of regulation, etc. And commensurately, the important part is that they train manpower which will implement these policies. So there is a manpower development scheme wherein environmental engineers are taught on how should they implement some of the components of the policy. And of course, they also follow what are the important global developments. For example, carbon tax, etc., is a very important global development which they have adopted within the country. They're also very innovative, and for instance, in civil aviation, in maritime, they have really taken some decisions which are very, very innovative and far-sighted. And the approach they follow is that they test it on a pilot basis, but they immediately identify how that has to be scaled up. And as I mentioned, they're very pragmatic. While they give primacy to reducing carbon emissions, but as it is a small country, it has its own impetus for economic growth, and therefore they try to balance economic development with environmental concerns. For example, petrochemical and refining is a major industrial sector in the country, and therefore they are not clamping down upon this industry to convert their manufacturing processes, other processing components into green features, and they are giving them adequate time to kind of modify and change their processes. And of course, it is very realistic. They understand how people react to different types of regulation, and therefore they spend lots of time in communication, awareness campaigns, and they prepare the community in how these kind of policies ought to be adapted. Now, if you compare how the scenario is in a typical Indian city, I incidentally come from the Indian city of Hyderabad, so I can tell you about my city. Now, in India also, the share of urban to total population has drastically increased. In the last 60 years, from 17%, the urban population has gone to 31%. And we have close to 8,000 towns now. Urban population alone is larger than the population of the United States of America. And there are many more million plus cities also. And this is likely to be the trend of urbanization in India in coming years as well. But if you compare what happens with the Singapore case and the Indian case, first of all, Indian cities, by and large, do not have a city-centric policy. There is a national action plan on climate change, and most of the Indian cities adapt that plan. And under the national plan, there are sub-missions which speak about enhanced energy efficiency also. And different cities have the freedom to choose which are the components they would like to implement on a priority basis. And the primacy to growth, as I explained, in Singapore, there is some balance, but in India, there is an out-and-out primacy given to economic growth, and climate change is only seen wherever possible, only if there is any co-benefit to growth while adopting climate change methods or those kind of things adopted. And then there is a reactive kind of a mindset. It is not very proactive, more focused on mitigation rather than adaptation. The institutional arrangements are also fragmented. Stakeholders are involved in a very, very limited manner. Policy options are also not very strong. And because India follows a federal structure, there are in many times disconnect between the federal priorities and the local priorities. And the challenges for cities in India is to kind of put together a well-balanced, well-laid-out system of climate change with supporting institutional mechanisms, and overcome these knowledge barriers, uncertainty, and of course provide financial commitment to some of these responses. So this is the point which I wanted to make, that energy efficiency can be secured if it is a part of the larger climate change policy, and Singapore is a very good exemplar on how to go about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jayesh. It's absolutely perfectly timed there at 12 minutes, so thank you very much for that. It makes my life much easier. And it's very interesting to hear about some of the things going on in city-states like Singapore in terms of both planning for the mitigation of climate change, but also the importance of having actions and policies in place that realistically meet those targets as well. There's not a lot of point in having a target unless you have a roadmap to meet that target. So it's very interesting to hear about what Singapore are doing in that respect. I'd now like to introduce the next speaker, the penultimate speaker, who is, I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, Frank, Fran de Sárraga from the city of Barcelona, who is the environment representative for the city of Barcelona and who is going to talk a little bit about what is going on much closer to home here in Barcelona. Thank you, Frank.
So, first of all, probably I should explain what is Diputació de Barcelona, because not all the countries have this level of administration. We are a second local level of administration, but the most important is we don't have a hierarchical relation with our 311 municipalities. And what are doing Diputació Barcelona in the energy efficiency field? So basically, we join and support the Covenant of Mayors initiative. I think you already know that initiative wants to convince the municipalities to commit to reduce their emissions to 25% in 2020. And Diputació Barcelona becomes the first territorial supporter, the first coordinator. And I think this figure was created because Diputació asked to participate in this initiative. And nowadays, 95% of our population are between this initiative, lives in a municipality that are in this initiative. And we already spent 3 million euros paying the sustainable energy action plans. Probably the most important that we have identified a lot of investment to can be done in this field. What is happening with the energy and municipalities in our country? So that is the tendency. A great increase of prices for some energy sources. And other energy sources that already have a good environmental behavior. They didn't increase, they even reduced the price. You can also see it, compare it, what is the cost of a kilowatt hour with different energy sources. What are the municipalities doing with this? They are doing their work. I have some examples. They are doing what they can. They are reducing, for example, the average of kilowatts installed for public lighting. And probably there could be another data of 120 for some cities by today. They are maintaining the quality of the light, the green light, the green line, but they are installing more lamps, but they are reducing the average of power of the lamps. But all of this work is enough. If you compare the blue line, that is the real consumption of energy, you see that they are doing the last year, they are doing their work. They are reducing the consumption, but even with this reduction of consumption, they have an increase of cost because the increase of energy is bigger than the reduction. So that is the thing that our municipalities are facing. It's a complicated scenario, as I say in the first slide. They already have the obligation of provide basic services. They have reduction of income of the economic crisis. They didn't have investment capability for this reduction of income, but more of that, they cannot endebt. By law, in Spain, a municipality cannot get in debt even with a project with an interesting period, return period. And also there's clearly a forecast of increase of prices of energy, and we convince them to commit to reduce their emissions, carrying CAP actions that need investments. So how can do that? We identify 3 basic strategies to do that in this scenario. The first is the most obvious. If you have some funds, use it in this field. The other is there's a lot of opportunities in savings of emissions, on saving of consumption without investments, with changes of behavior of very low cost investments. And the third way is a way we are receiving money from the EU, from the ELENA project. We are trying to use the collaboration of public-private to implement investments with the funds of the privates. So the first is the most obvious. Is if you have the lottery, you have some money, you can spend it in a project that have an interesting return period, so you can use this money twice. From Diputació, we try to help this choice of projects, taking in account this if the project has a return, an interesting return period, when we give them investment support. And we count, probably there could be more, but last year we give 6 million euros for projects that are the kind of projects. And if you want an example, in the last slide we have an experience with a big city. They collect money to make some investments in the public lighting regulation, not rated with efficiency, rated with security and so on. And they realize if they do the investment in efficiency in 4 years, they have enough money to do the both investments. So this city, Granollers, make a contract with the same money. They reach the efficiency and reach the regulation of lighting. The second strategy. This is a very interesting data from a comarca. A comarca is another level of local government. We have a lot of levels in Catalonia of governments. I don't know if this is very helpful or not. But this is interesting because they are comparing the consumption and the cost of different schools from private and from the public sector. The blue ones are the public sector, and the red ones are the private sector. So there's a clear gap of opportunity to be more efficiency for the public sector. And as the slide show, they are not rated with the amount of scholars or the size of the school. La Agencia Local de Energía de Zona, that's what we are working with the data, finds that there are probably a gap of 30% of savings only related to measure what you are consuming. Only looking at the data, you get these savings, and there are also a 20% more, and they could be like a private one with very low investments. Another example from Diputació is an European project we developed the last 3 years, and nowadays we are starting a second phase of this project even bigger. We try to use the win-win schema with the schools. The municipalities usually pay the bill, the energy bill of the schools, and the users, they didn't receive any punishment or any price for if they are good or bad users. So we try to develop a model where the municipality tell the schoolers if they reduce the consumption of energy, they share the benefits. And with the first experience in 3 years, in 58 schools, we reach 2,100 euros saved for school. So this was a success, and nowadays we're starting another more impressive project with 500 schools, and we are already trying to use this model not only in schools but also in other public facilities. So the last one, how can you make investment without funds? We think that in the SEAP we redact for the municipalities, there's a lot of actions that could probably generate enough revenues or enough savings to pay the initial investments in a rational period of time. So we think what can do Diputació with this scenario is to try to generate the necessary scenario to implement these actions that could be paid by themselves. We think the public partnership could be the solution, the key. Basically, we use the ESCO schema. So it's the private sector who got investment capacity, who make the investments, and we share the benefits, and even the municipality have a direct saving in their economy, not only in these consumptions. You have here some lighting projects we do in the last 3 years, and also some biomass projects. We started with some renewable projects, but in Spain, with the change of regulation, it becomes impossible, so we focus in efficiency projects. Basically, we use 2 million euros the European Commission gives to us. We have to convert it in 15 million euros because we have a leverage of 25 in the Elena line. Because of the problem of the renewables, they give us another year. So the project, the final direction of the project would be 4 years, not 3. And that's the results by today. So we are in line to accomplish that and to generate models that could be applied when the Elena finalize. So 3 hopeful conclusions. Even in no circumstances, it's possible to make investments in efficiency. There's a lot of opportunities without cost, only with change of behavior. And even with the project that need investments could be done with public-private schemes of funding collaboration. And finally, a last challenge we found with all the data we collect. We found that for the little village, comparing with the big cities, the cost of implement the SEAP actions could be even 10 times bigger than a big city. So we think that our main challenge as a Diputació, as a second-level government, is to help this little village to make the same that the big cities are doing. Thanks for all.
Thank you very much, Frank. That's very interesting for me to listen to because we are confronting many of those issues in cities and local authorities in the United Kingdom at the moment. And a big way city councils are using to fund energy-saving projects is by securing finance based on the energy cost savings that project will make. So there needs to be a good financial business case. There needs to be a lot of due diligence done to ensure that the projects being invested in will actually generate those savings. So we have very many of the same issues in the UK now. I'm now going to introduce the last speaker, who's going to show us a slightly different perspective from that of a large corporate. That's Chris Benardis, who is the General Manager for Corporate and Social Responsibility for Nissan. Thank you, Chris.
Well, thank you, everyone, for the opportunity today, and hopefully we can give a little bit of counterbalance from the point of view of the private sector. I represent Nissan Motor Corporation in Europe. My scope is for corporate social responsibility, covering not only the European region, but also Africa, Middle East, and India. If you're not familiar with Nissan, of course, an automotive company, obviously something that is near and dear to us is CO2 and consumption. We're a Japanese company, but we have a very global footprint. And you can see just by proportion of our last year's sales of around 5 million units, the bulk of that is done outside of Japan and with growing proportion. Our midterm plan for the next few years as a corporation we call Power 88, and that's really focused on driving the business toward higher market share and higher profit. But within that is a commitment toward being the pioneer and pushing the envelope in terms of zero emission and sustainable mobility. Our corporate social responsibility platform we call Blue Citizenship. I'll explain that to you in a little bit more. But our main focus is really around electric fuel cell vehicles, making them more attractive, fun to drive for consumers, focusing on the global entry cars to service markets that either don't have the infrastructure today or are looking for solutions that are a little bit more practical and economical, and using technology to improve not only the consumption, but enhance safety and promote better performance and better onboard satisfaction when you're driving. Blue Citizenship is our corporate social responsibility platform. It's been in place for now almost 10 years. And we understand that Nissan as a company is expected to contribute as a citizen. We have one platform with three main pillars around sustainability, mobility, and community. It's adopted worldwide. It covers all of our brands, and it's an integrated approach that has a very direct interaction with the business. And as a region, for Africa, Middle East, and India, and Europe, we have even our own specific focus around driving improvement for safer and cleaner roads, and trying to utilize the promotion of driver education, safety awareness, and focus on zero-emission mobility to improve our overall footprint. The Blue Citizenship platform within Nissan has 8 different sustainability strategies, and at the forefront is the environment. We recognize that, and we have a specific program within our company called the Nissan Green Program, which is focused on reducing the vehicle's environmental impact and focusing on expanding the lineup of greener products and greener technologies to promote an overall reduction in our environmental footprint. So I have a couple of ideas around how that can affect us in what we've been discussing today in relation to the city. First and foremost is on what we're used to seeing in conventional internal combustion engines, which obviously are going to be with us for some time. But how can we improve that? And the company has introduced what we call the pure drive concept that covers the issues we have today, but focuses as well on the longer term. You can see on the chart below, focusing towards an overall improvement of our corporate average fuel economy, 35% by 2016, and translating that into CO2 reduction on a corporate basis, I believe is around 20%. And as we stand today, we're well on target to achieve the 2012 milestone and further towards 2016. Taking the internal combustion engine today and adapting it obviously is something that people are familiar with. The hybrids are with us today. We've been with us for about 10 years with I think pretty good success. But how to improve that in terms of battery technology, the relationship and improving performance with some improvements in how the two motors interact with each other, and adapting the continuously variable transmission, which has a massive impact on fuel economy. These are all initiatives that we've taken to just focus and improve the efficiency that we can get out of our existing technologies. But obviously there's a limit to that. So for the long term, zero-emission mobility is really the area of which we're focusing. And along with our alliance partner Renault, our ambition is to be the 100% EV pioneer worldwide. As an alliance, we've invested 4 billion euros since 1992. If you've seen perhaps within this Congress, the Leaf EV has sold more than 83,000 units since its launch a few years ago, and that accounts for more than half of all EV sales globally. And with the current technology, it's an affordable proposition. We have a driving range of around 199 kilometers, which is improving all the time. In addition to that, it doesn't stop with just the passenger car. I think the biggest challenge within the city, it doesn't just address people getting from point A to point B and doing that in the least CO2 impactful way, but also the need for more environmentally responsible alternatives for delivery. So the ENV200, which you also may have seen, is a delivery van concept that will be with us very shortly in production, and will help to service the needs of the inner city in delivering with a zero-emission proposition, which is quite good. And we have to reinvent the vision of mobility within the city. So obviously this is one aspect from the point of view of the automobile, but getting people to adapt to the technology that serves the city, obviously EV is one that is quite well suited. The last is taking the ideas sort of beyond the automobile, and just we're considering as sort of the normal get in your car and go somewhere, but actually trying to expand the reach and scope, and as well from a corporate point of view, show real commitment towards the environment and making the impact less. So as Nissan, we are very committed to being responsible and transparent in terms of our impact on the environment. Within the 2013 Carbon Disclosure Project, we are now in the Climate Disclosure Leadership Index for the first time. And that's an acknowledgement of Nissan in terms of its attitude and position towards disclosing this information around the environment, and our serious attitude towards supporting that. We've also moved in some very interesting studies towards how cars are actually interacting with the urban environment. And one of the most interesting is with respect to using onboard telematics, which has the ability to communicate using the onboard GPS and using the mobile device to communicate with the central data center to give some indication of where cars are and how traffic's evolving. And what we found in some of the studies in China, where with just a 10% adoption of this technology, where cars know where the traffic is, and through sort of a smart routing, traffic can be diverted. We get an overall increase in traffic flow, which is good because less time idling means less CO2. And getting to your destination faster, obviously, from the interest of time, is quite good. And these small improvements will certainly have an impact towards CO2 reduction in the future. Beyond purely just looking at the motor vehicle, we're engaged in collaboration with external partners in this new focus on multimodality. We're within the 11 partners platform called AVER. Nissan, along with others, committed towards investigating multimodality within the European context and trying to improve the overall integration of all the different transportation platforms. In addition to that, there's a lot coming in the future. Technologies like autonomous driving, we've seen some of that already in the news, but we as a company are committed to introduce that by 2020 and make it an affordable proposition that is attractive for a large audience. Utilizing the electric vehicle as a buffer and support to your own home energy needs is another interesting proposition that we can think of. And after the great Japan earthquake in 2011, it was demonstrated in the field where a leaf on a full charge can actually support a house for around 24 hours just on the battery supply that it can provide and feed back into the house. So you can think of some interesting potential in terms of load balancing or using off-peak electricity price to store energy and feed it back when it's a little more in demand. So there's lots of options that we can explore that even go beyond the idea of just getting from point A to point B in a car. And that's really the focus of our contribution to smart cities, and hopefully to take the perception beyond what we see today in terms of mobility. So I'd like to thank you for your time today and get a little bit of overview in terms of Nissan and its attitude towards enriching people's lives, and hopefully our vision is consistent with where we're going in terms of the overall smart cities concept. I'd like to thank you for your attention.